Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that takes the food on your plate and connects it to the bigger world. Because food is never just food. It's health, community, the environment, and our economy. On this show, we talk with thought leaders from every corner of the food world: farmers, chefs, scientists, policymakers, historians, and innovators, because understanding food means understanding how the world actually works. I'm your host, Dana DiPrima. In today's episode, we're stepping outside of the usual conversations about fixing the industrial food system and asking a more radical and surprisingly practical question. What if resilience doesn't come from repairing a broken system, but from building a parallel one? My guest today is David Fisher, a botanist, former USDA-funded potato breeder, and environmental scientist who has spent decades studying plants, sustainability, and food systems at the deepest level. David brings a scientist's rigor and a system thinker's perspective to a conversation that challenges some of our most entrenched assumptions about agriculture, climate change, and food security. In this episode, we talk about why industrial agriculture may be fundamentally unfixable, how home and household food gardens could act as a national backup system, and what history, from victory gardens in World War II to large-scale household gardening in Russia, can teach us about feeding people in times of crisis. We also explore David's own experiment, living exclusively on food grown in his garden, what that revealed about scale and possibility, and why he believes growing food may soon shift from a lifestyle choice to a matter of national security. This conversation isn't just about gardening. It's about resilience, agency, and what it means to truly participate in the food system instead of just consuming from it. This is One Bite is Everything, and this conversation matters.
I'm a botanist, basically. Okay? I got my undergraduate degree in botany at NC State University, then the master's and PhD at the University of Wisconsin. And what that gave me was a really basic, solid, wide, comprehensive knowledge of plants.
What kind of work did you do specifically?
In the area of research that I was in for quite a few years happened to be in the basic structure and functioning of leaves at the microscopic level. In fact, even at the ultra microscopic level. So it was very basic research. I did, between 15 and 20 publications in that area. Then I got interested in environmental science. I came here and I started going into, first of all, crop breeding. I mean, potatoes. I was a USDA-funded potato breeder for a while. And then from there, gravitated towards sustainability and taught environmental science and then sustainability and did a lot of innovative things in that area. So started out with botany and ended up with sustainability in general.
Explain to me, if you're a USDA potato grower, what does that mean?
I was a potato breeder, not a grower.
Breeder, excuse me.
Yeah. It's crop breeding that's been going on for thousands of years, but it means trying to make a better plant, whatever plant you've chosen. In my case, it was breeding potatoes for resistance to the Colorado potato beetle, which is the number one insect consumer of potato leaves. So that's what I did for a while.
I have a question that I think a lot of people have when you talk about potato breeding, for example, for a particular trait that will resist a bug that we don't want, because then we don't get yummy potatoes. How is that different than GMO?
What I did was conventional potato breeding, okay? And there's a couple of different ways to go with that. But that is, I used one called recurrent mass selection, which is basically you test the plant to see how resistant it is to something, and then you pick out the ones that are the most resistant. Whereas with GMOs, and there were GMO potatoes for a while, they take a gene from another plant or even from a bacterium like BT out of its original and insert it into the potato plant randomly, just a random insertion in order to get a particular trait. Very different.
So you're either adjusting a DNA completely or you're mimicking natural selection.
Yes, I'm sort of mimicking natural selection, but it's then selecting the plant that shows, in this case, the most resistance to Colorado potato beetle eating the leaves, saving those plants, and then crossbreeding them. And then each generation, you get a little more and a little more and a little more resistance.
And is that something that happens in the field then under natural circumstances, meaning they're potato beetles and we've got rows and rows of potato plants?
Not the way most potatoes are grown today, which is by basically clones. In this country, potatoes are grown by putting seed potatoes in the ground, and they're all genetically exactly like one another. So generation to generation, year to year, there's no chance for it to have mutations and evolve. It doesn't happen. They're clones. Each variety, of course, has a little bit different genetics. A russet Burbank potato is different from a Yukon Gold or whatever. But within a particular variety, they're all genetically exactly alike. They do not evolve.
What most people don't realize is that the potatoes filling grocery store bins are not evolving crops, but near identical clones, genetic photocopies of a single variety planted year after year, which means that when a pest like the Colorado potato beetle arrives, it encounters an entire field with the exact same vulnerabilities. A potato breeder working within conventional methods is quietly reintroducing evolution back into that system, not by inserting foreign genes, but by mimicking natural selection at an accelerated pace, planting diverse crosses, observing which plants withstand a beetle's appetite, saving those survivors, and repeating the cycle until resistance slowly accumulates across generations. It is a patient, almost invisible craft that sits between agriculture and ecology, part science, part stewardship, where the goal isn't to engineer a crop in a lab, but to restore resilience to a plant that industrial farming has rendered genetically uniform. Understanding this distinction reframes the conversation around food and technology. Crop breeding, in its traditional form, is less about controlling nature and more about collaborating with it, guiding plants toward strength in a world where monocultures have made our food system both efficient and surprisingly fragile. So you go from this work and you have a particular thesis in mind that you've been working on for 5 years or so?
It actually goes back much further than that. So that basic foundation in botany and the research that I did, that was all getting a foundation. And then I moved to this little consciousness-based university here in Fairfield, where everybody meditates, twice a day, and went much deeper into sustainability in a number of different levels.
What's the name of the university?
It's called Maharishi International University. So it's where the TM movement basically has its university. So I was here for 25 years doing that and was able to go into what we developed in our department as deep sustainability, which is much beyond the usual type of sustainability that everyone talks about.
Explain that to me.
Okay. Conventional sustainability is basically about improving things with substitution and efficiency, whereas deep sustainability is about systematically changing entire systems. And actually, in my research on gardening and on food systems, that's exactly what I do too. Instead of fixing the industrial food system, I go for offering an alternative food system that doesn't depend on fixing what I consider to be an unfixable industrial food system.
In just outlining the food systems that we have, we definitely have the industrial food system, which we could probably talk about for days. We have what I consider to be maybe small and mid-sized farmers that are maybe selling at farmers markets or selling direct. Maybe they have some other niche markets, but for the most part aren't selling through those same industrial channels. They're more maybe local farmers and whatnot. And you're suggesting a third system.
That is correct.
Are there any other systems we need to consider?
Well, it depends on how you want to divide it up. I consider there's two basic ways to produce food for the masses. One is through farms, and you can divide that up into, industrial type farms and then more, let's say small local farms, but they're still farms. The other way is through gardens, and you can feed the masses through gardens, contrary to the common belief. And Russia has done this on a mass scale. Big research project that was done in 2008 showed that half of their food supply comes from household gardens on just 3% of its agricultural land in the whole country.
Is that sort of a nationally sponsored program, or is this just really individual?
Not at all. The Russian government gives those gardeners zero help. In fact, they give them zero recognition. It's almost like they're embarrassed. Okay. And the other half of their food is produced by regular industrial means. In fact, they ship a lot of agricultural products abroad, including fertilizers. But nevertheless, that garden-based food system is there and has been for well over a millennium. There's something about the Russian people that just really deeply adhere to the ground. And so that's what they do. And it's convenient for me because my research shows that I can do it at the individual level and compare it with the industrial food system here. But it's handy that it has been proven out at the range of scores of millions. So it's scalable at the large scale of production and consumption.
Do you wonder about that system and the kind of environment that it exists in, where maybe there's more scarcity? So there's no Costco or Walmart for them to go to buy food, or maybe no funding, no individual, income to support that. I'm just curious about the idea, which, I'm a gardener, so I obviously love eating from my garden, but I just wonder what it takes to motivate a population that big to actually get up off their butts and do it.
Okay, for the Russians, this big study that was done in 2008, very, very comprehensive, found that it was not because they couldn't get enough food from the local grocery stores. They do it for quite a number of other cultural and traditional reasons and love of the working the land and all of that. So it's not because, we can't get the food in the grocery store, so we have to grow it ourselves. And they've been doing it for a long, long time on that basis.
What's most revealing about Russia's vast network of household gardens is not just that they produce so much food, but what they say about the underlying beliefs people hold about land, security, and self-reliance. For many generations, many Russians have treated food growing not as a lifestyle choice or a hobby, but as a baseline responsibility, an inherited understanding that resilience comes from staying tethered to the soil, regardless of what the formal economy or government provides. In the United States, by contrast, the dominant ideology has long framed food production as something that happens elsewhere, outsourced to large farms, optimized for efficiency, and delivered through complex supply chains, leaving individuals positioned primarily as consumers rather than producers. These differing orientations shape not only how food is grown, but how people imagine stability and autonomy. In one context, tending a garden is a normalized extension of everyday life and a hedge against uncertainty. In the other, it's often optional, aesthetic, or recreational. When a significant portion of a country's population maintains a direct relationship with growing food, it cultivates a collective mindset of participation and preparedness that runs parallel to industrial systems, whereas a culture more removed from production can become structurally dependent on them. The contrast reveals how ideology about independence, trust in institutions, and one's role in the food chain determines whether small-scale growing is seen as essential infrastructure or simply a personal choice. So back to the United States, we have this big industrial system. you don't think we can fix, and farming in general. Maybe we're just putting all of that to the side, but let's talk about what you think is possible.
So, possible in this country, we sort of demonstrated that in World War II with the Victory Gardens.
Can you explain Victory Gardens a little bit?
So, the US government realized that they were sending so much of their food to the soldiers on the front that they were going to not have enough food for the home population. So, through the USDA, they basically talked the country, or as many people as possible, into growing food in their own backyards. Now, a lot of people were already doing that, but of course, it greatly increased. And so they started up a quick training program. And within a year or two, they had gotten to the point where 20 million gardens were producing 40% of the vegetables that the country needed. And this wasn't the only place. There were victory gardens in other countries, especially during World War II. So it is possible to up the food production and consumption quite dramatically in a very short period of time so that more food can be shipped to the troops. And it worked. And it's worked in other places too.
Do you know what that training from the USDA entailed?
Well, we have these research stations all around the country, and they used to have it in every county and every state that connected the research from universities to the people, these research stations, these field stations. So they did it through that. The agents were already there. So they just put out the word, they did the training, they told the people to come in if they'd never had a garden. Here's how you have a garden. And they demonstrated, they taught them, they instructed them, and so forth. So the system was basically already set up through the USDA to teach people how to garden who didn't already have a garden.
What's fascinating about the Victory Garden moment is not just that millions of people suddenly started growing food, but that it revealed how quickly a population can shift its relationship to the food system when the cultural story changes. In the United States, large-scale industrial agriculture is often framed as the only realistic way to feed the nation. Yet, during World War II, the government temporarily flipped the narrative. Food production became a shared civic duty, and within a couple of years, roughly 20 million households were supplying a significant portion of the country's vegetables. The infrastructure to make this happen, local extension offices, research stations, practical training, was already embedded in communities, but it took a national sense of purpose to activate it. What this suggests is that capacity for decentralized food production has never really disappeared. It's been overshadowed by an ideology that positions efficiency and specialization above participation. The Victory Garden era shows that when people are invited to see themselves not just as consumers, but as contributors to the food supply, production can expand rapidly and collectively. The interesting question isn't whether people can grow more food, but what cultural conditions or narratives are required for them to feel that it's part of their role to do so. Did they recommend that you grow certain things that were like easier to grow, or some of the basics, or what was the idea?
What I saw was in those training manuals, just basically just about any vegetable, but especially the vegetables that are now grown, which is in people's gardens today. They grow vegetables that are basically low in calories and low in protein. So they have lots of nutrients like vitamins and minerals and so forth, but you couldn't live off of them for very long. Now, the USDA did recommend potatoes, but not so much the things that really count in terms of protein and carbohydrates, like beans, dried shell beans, not green beans, but dried shell beans, corn, even sweet potatoes. So it was enough, it was enough to help tide over the food supply until the war was over.
Now, I'm curious. So back in the day, we had all of these USDA stations, and they had two things. They had the resources to say, like, here, we can show you how to make a garden. But they also had an edict, right? Like, tell everybody they need to grow a garden as a part of our wartime effort. So what's the modern day equivalent to that? Meaning, we could grow a significant portion of our food in our own independent gardens, but it's a word of mouth project, or how do you envision it?
So right now, about 41% of American households already have a food garden of some kind. 41%.
Really?
That's a lot. However, like I said, they only grow watery vegetables, high in vitamins and minerals, but low in calories and protein. So it would have to be an upgrade. And what I have come to realize since I wrote my first book was what's going to drive all of that is climate change. These climate disasters are happening more and more frequently, more and more intensely. And at some point, I believe people are going to say, well, this isn't just an option anymore, it's a necessity. They're going to be motivated by that. Right now, most people say, oh, it's just so easy to go to the grocery store and pick up a few things. Oh, I don't want to go out and have to start my own garden. It's too much work, it's too much effort, it takes too much time. Who has the time, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the value that people have right now. Much greater value in getting your groceries from a grocery store than growing it yourself. But I believe that will change. I really believe that's going to change, and quite soon.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the moment where the majority of us feel that pressure. Like this is a necessity to do this, right? Like climate change is breathing down our necks and we've got to do something about it. Explain to me how each of us having our own garden is going to address that.
Climate change comes about mostly because of the excess carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere. That's coming about from fossil fuels. The industrial food system uses an enormous amount of fossil fuels and also water and also energy, all of that. When you can produce enough to feed yourself with a small fraction of the amount of biology, energy, resources with gardens that it takes the industrial system to produce the same amount of food, then you can start to conserve those resources, energy, water, all of that. And so therefore, there's much less pressure on the biosphere, and you can greatly reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is emitted from the extremely heavy use of fossil fuels by the industrial food system.
So I'm reducing the number of times a tractor goes up and down a field and the diesel fuel that they're using. I'm reducing the shipping of fruits and vegetables to my grocery store, right?
That's right.
Climate change is driven largely by excess carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, and the industrial food system is one of its major contributors because it depends on heavy machinery, long-distance transport, constant refrigeration, energy-intensive synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and large-scale irrigation. When even a portion of food production shifts toward home gardens, community plots, and small local farms, the entire chain becomes less resource intensive. Food grown closer to where it's eaten can be harvested and consumed quickly, reducing the need for long-term cold storage and global shipping. Smaller scale growing often relies more on hand tools and low energy systems rather than fuel powered equipment, and healthier compost rich soils hold more moisture more effectively, which means less irrigation is needed in the first place. Local and regenerative methods also tend to use fewer synthetic inputs, whose production and application require significant fossil fuel and water use. With shorter supply chains, less machinery, reduced refrigeration, and improved soil water retention, overall energy and water demand drops substantially. By returning some food production to localized, lower input systems, we ease pressure on ecosystems, conserve water, lower emissions, and move toward a more resilient food system that supports both human health and the health of the planet.
I want to emphasize that I'm not suggesting that we turn 100% from industrial to 100% gardens. That's not what I'm suggesting. That's not even possible. Okay.
It's
because
a
a lot of people
supplement.
don't even have a place to put a garden, much less the incentive to do it. But a very large percentage of our food could easily be produced in gardens, very easily and very quickly once people got the incentive to do it. It's not rocket science.
And where do you think that incentive comes from back to human behavior?
It'll have to be a change in values, and it will take the fear, I believe, of climate change disasters, or it could be something else. It could be the food system will break down of its own. It could be the bird flu, I'm sure you've heard about, mutates into a form that renders dairy cows really sick, so that would alarm people. It's already gotten into some humans. Okay, maybe it mutates into another COVID type situation. Could be something like that. It could be the farmers are under extreme stress right now because of all of the changes that have been made by the current administration. They're really, really hurting. So the food system is fragile already. And then if you consider the LA fires, for instance, something like that, or when Hurricane Helene swept up into Western North Carolina, which is where I grew up, and just absolutely devastated Asheville and the surrounding areas. When those types of things start happening more frequently and more intensely and geographically closer together, so that the government is less and less able to come to people's aid, and it's already having a lot of trouble in that respect, at some point, people are just going to say, it really makes sense for me to grow my own food. What this will be is basically a matter of national security. I'm just talking about this country right now, us, having a strategic food reserve so that if a big disaster happens, like the overdue Great Flood in the Central Valley of California, I don't know if you've heard of that situation. If that happens, they produce 40% of the country's food. It would be a huge, huge shock. But if we have a garden food system in place, we will have a buffer. We will have a strategic food reserve, which right now we don't have.
One of the quiet paradoxes of modern societies is that we rarely change course when we first recognize risk. We change when risk becomes disruption. The industrial food system's heavy use of fossil fuels, water, and energy is not a hidden problem, nor is the fact that far more resource-efficient, decentralized ways of producing food already exist. What holds change back is less a lack of solutions than a deeply human tendency to prioritize convenience and stability until something breaks. Historically, shifts toward local production, redundancy, and self-provisioning have surged only when systems strain during wars, disasters, or supply shocks that make fragility visible. Until then, resilience feels optional rather than essential. This reveals a behavioral pattern that extends far beyond agriculture. Societies are structured to optimize for efficiency in the present, even when doing so reduces their capacity to absorb future shocks. The idea of distributed food growing as a kind of everyday buffer, an unglamorous but powerful form of security, sits in tension with this mindset. It is both simple and scalable, yet difficult to prioritize without a catalyst. This point hints to the fact that the real challenge isn't whether alternatives exist, but whether humans can change their behavior and act on long-term foresight rather than waiting for disruption to force adaptation. Tell me what the influencers and films and experts and, all the people who are thinking about climate change, for example, and agriculture, what are they doing wrong?
Basically, they want to fix the industrial food system so that it works better. I am totally convinced that is a fool's errand. It's not going to happen, and it can't happen. Now, there are great people who are really working hard on it. They really want it to happen and all of that. But the solutions are generally fall into several well-known categories. One, eat less meat. Good luck on that. They've been trying to do that for decades, and meat consumption just keeps going up and up and up, especially around the world, going down slightly in the US, but not much. Less food waste. Well, they've been working on that for decades and decades too. 30% of our food is wasted. So cut those things out and you're great. But neither one of those things have ever worked. And so and the other one is increase crop yields or increase the amount of crops that are planted out. Recent studies have shown that that's not going to be enough over the next 25 years. There are going to be about 2 billion more people by 2050. And the latest studies show that the current industrial food system, the global food system, simply cannot meet that need. In fact, it's going to fall about 75% short just by 2050.
And so this more local garden, taking care of your own needs, is going to help supplement the gap?
Yes, it will. As far as I can tell, it's the only thing that can meet the needs of the future. The slightly alternative farm system has never produced any more than about 1% of the food supply in this country. It just doesn't have the volume, nor can it ramp up fast enough to meet that need. But a national system of self-sufficiency gardens like I do can, okay, and fairly quickly. And it's already been proven by the Victory Gardens and also what the Russian gardeners have been doing for a long time.
So let's talk about this. You decided to prove it.
Right.
Tell me about your grand experiment.
Well, I'd had a garden ever since I was about 12 years old, off and on over the years. But when COVID hit and I saw how the food system was struggling, I thought, well, really, everybody should have a Victory Garden. That's just obvious. And then I remembered Morgan Spurlock's documentary, Supersize Me. He did that back in about 2004, in which he decided to eat only at McDonald's for 30 days straight. And I said, well, and of course, he documented what it did to his body and his mind. And I decided, well, why don't I do that except eat only from my garden for 30 days straight? So I did it, okay? Ate only from my garden, and I kept really good records of exactly how much I ate and exactly how much space in my garden it took. I'm a scientist, so I know how to keep records. So I did all that, and I even got a physical exam before and after. And after that 30 days, my cholesterol had gone down by 15 points. So the doctor was impressed. So I said, okay, if I can eat only from my garden for 30 days on this amount of space, if I multiply that by 12, I should be able to eat for a year off the garden. So I calculated it out. That turned out to be a garden 35 by 40 feet, which for reference is a little over half as large as the floor space of the average house in this country. Not very big. So next year I planted it out and it produced over 1,000 pounds of vegetables. And by the portion sizes, which I used in my experiment, which were quite generous, enough for well over a year's supply of food. So I proved to myself at the individual level that it could be done. So that's the proof at one end. And then Russia's household gardens prove it at the other end, at the mass scale. So that's why I'm convinced that this can work.
It makes you realize how strange it is that we trust global supply chains more than a patch of dirt. We've built a world where survival feels like something managed by logistics, shipping routes, and barcodes, until someone quietly proves that a rectangle of soil smaller than a living room can outproduce our assumptions. The garden becomes less about vegetables and more about scale. How small the threshold for sufficiency might actually be, and how large our sense of dependency has grown. There's something almost mischievous in this experiment, like nature running a gentle audit on modern life, reminding us that resilience doesn't always look like innovation or optimization, but like remembering a set of skills our bodies never really forgot. It leaves you with an unsettling, liberating question. If it takes so little land to feed a person well, what else in our lives have we overcomplicated simply because we stopped testing the obvious? Did you get sick of eating any one vegetable in your experiment on 30 days? I'm just curious.
No, because I had enough variety. I had about 21, I think, or so different forms. For instance, all the usual vegetables plus corn and beans, green beans, squashes, tomatoes, and some zucchinis, some sweet potatoes, and just a nice variety of things. I didn't get the least bit bored.
And then just curious, in this model, how are we getting meat?
Oh, well, I didn't have any meat during that time. Okay. So what I was doing was showing that you could get enough nutrition. In other words, the protein that you'd ordinarily get from meat. Now, I do not ask people or expect people to stop eating meat. All I'm trying to do is to get them to grow as much as they can in their gardens. Eat as much meat as you want.
Right. This is a supplement. This is to take the burden off the system.
It's to grow as much of your own food as you can. Okay. And for some people, they will just do whole vegetables and only eat from their gardens like I did. But others, it will be partly that and partly still from the grocery store. And some will still have meat and some won't, and so forth. So there's a wide range of possibility there. I don't ever say that it has to be 100%. About 10% of the country has no room for a garden. It's about 30 million people by my estimates. So the industrial food system is going to be around for a while. But what I see is that it's going to fail, and pretty soon, within the next 10 to 15 years. And so we have to have a backup system. So you could call home gardens the backup system.
What you just heard was a conversation about food, but also about preparedness, climate reality, and the quiet power of personal agency in a fragile system. David Fisher invited us to rethink where resilience actually lives, to question the idea that the only way forward is fixing industrial agriculture, and to consider how something as simple as growing food could function as a collective buffer against climate disruption, supply chain breakdowns, and uncertainty ahead. This episode connects every bite you take to bigger questions about independence, sustainability, and security, and reminds us that the future of food may be closer to home than we've been taught to believe. This is exactly why One Bite is Everything exists. The podcast is proud to be in the top 3% of podcasts globally, with more engagement than 88% of podcasts on Spotify through comments and shares, and with more than 150 episodes exploring how food connects to health, community, the environment, and the economy. If this episode sparked new questions for you or challenged how you think about food and resilience, I hope you'll take a minute to leave a 5-star rating and a written review, especially on Apple Podcasts or through the link in the show notes. These reviews help this conversation reach more people like you who are hungry for deeper, more honest discussions about our food system. This episode was co-produced by Sonia Dillon, with sound engineering and original music by Russell Chapa. I am your host, Dana DiPrima. Thank you for listening, for sharing, and for being a part of the community. Until next week, eat like it matters, because it does.